G'day guys and welcome, my name's Michael and I am the Deadaussiegamer, here to share with you my tips, tricks, ideas and strategies for playing and running tabletop role-playing games. We are back with another class spotlight focusing on Paladins. Now, the reason we're going to be looking at Paladins today is because, well, I feel like they are one of the most contested classes in all RPGs. This is really stemmed from the fact that there is a lot of restrictions around how to play a paladin, and we're going to be talking about that in today's video. We're going to be looking at what makes a paladin, the different types of paladins that you may be able to play or see in a game, and of course, my personal take on how to handle them both as a player and in a narrative. So, without any further ado, let's talk paladins! So what is a paladin? A paladin is a crusader, in my opinion. Someone who is a champion on behalf of a church. They may be a church of dreams, they may be a church of healing, a church of mercy, of righteousness, of justice. These paladins are the champions who set forth into the world with righteousness and conviction in their hearts and try to do by the church's bidding. Anti-Paladins, who are another type of paladins, are similarly crusaders of evil churches, ones who have more sinister and more tyrannical types of plots and machinations and set about doing evil upon the world. These two paladins share a lot in common, that of course being their conviction, their solidarity with their church, and of course their ultimate goals of trying to be the best paladins that they can be. But at the same time, the morality conflict is where we see the root of our problems with the paladins. Lots of people arguing over, is this moral? Is this immoral? Where is the line drawn? And the reason people argue about this is because when a paladin fails in either their code or even morale-wise, they fall, they lose their powers, and they can no longer tap into a lot of their mechanical abilities in the game. As such, players can get very defensive when faced with what we call the Paladin's Dilemma, a situation that challenges the morality of a character, but at the same time bears and carries the risk of, well, if you make the wrong choice, you might fall, but both of these choices are pretty bad. Because we don't live in a world where there is always good and evil. It's not a black and white society we build, and therefore it is not a black and white game we play. Paladins, sadly, need to play that game, which makes them very difficult to play. So, how do we handle this? With so much drama and so much, conflict, why play a paladin? Why not just leave them out of the equation? Well, at the end of the day, paladins have a place in RPGs. Unlike clerics who are divine, devout worshippers of these gods and deities, paladins are those who are more assertive, more combat-driven, and more capable of fulfilling the more forward-thinking versions of the church's dogma. As such, these paladins are prone to making great combatants as well as support characters, and work really well in groups, provided the group can kind of deal with the morality of the paladin. But there are obviously ways that one can mitigate the paladinness in order to find a fun, interesting, and engaging way to not only have fun within the narrative, but with your players as well. So, how do we do this? First of all, we need to understand the difference between paladins in, say, something like Pathfinder and paladins in Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons uses what we call the Oath Paladins. These are the guys who pretty much customized to following a specific code of conduct. Breaking that code of conduct is what loses them their abilities. For example, in Dungeons and Dragons 5e, there is the tenets of devotion. They need to remain honest, do not lie or cheat. Your word is your promise. They need to have courage, never fear to act through, though caution may be wise. Compassion. Aid others, protect the weak, and punish those who threaten them. Show mercy to your foes, but temper it with wisdom. Honor. Treat others with fairness, and let your honorable deeds be an example to them. Do as much good as possible while causing the least amount of harm. And duty. Be responsible for your action and their consequences. Protect those entrusted to your care, and obey those who have just authority over you. Now, by following these tenets, you are indeed a paladin, but breaking these tenets risks losing those abilities. On the other scale, we have the Pathfinder style of paladin, which, alongside the tenets that they need to follow as part of their paladin's code, they must also follow an alignment, which for paladins is lawful good, meaning they have to stick to their word and be truthful to their honor, as well as be paragons of good and righteousness and all that jazz. And of course, then you have the anti-paladins, who must be chaotic evil. They have to be agents of chaos. They must be liars and cheats and swindlers, and they must do whatever feels their whims and sop at life's very bosom for their own selfish purposes, doing acts of evil and mercilessness. Unless, of course, you play an Iron Tyrant archetype, which I'm not going to talk about, because this isn't a Pathfinder video. But that is the difference between the two. Now, I think both of them are right, but they've gotten it, I suppose, slightly wrong, in my opinion. Honestly, I like the idea of the oath-bound paladin, someone who has a code that they need to follow. But I think having simply a simple template that applies to all paladins isn't really the right way to go about it. I think paladins belonging to a church should strictly follow the tenets of that church. That deity should have a huge list of things that paladin is not allowed to break, and things that paladin must fulfill. For example, I look at a character who plays, let's say, a paladin of Gorham. Now, Gorham is the god of war. He's a neutral god. He is the king on the battlefield. He ends up fueling conflict and battle. Now, a paladin could easily fit into this category. Why would there not be a paladin of the god of war? But, you know what? Lying, for example, like the whole honesty thing, why wouldn't a paladin of Gorham lie? If a paladin of Gorham really is worshipping Gorham and trying to fulfill his duty, I mean, why wouldn't he lie in order to try and continue the conflict? That will serve the interests of his god, or her god. It may not be the good thing, it may not be the evil thing, but that's the thing that you as a paladin should be doing. This is kind of my opinion on it. Alignments and stuff like that, I think they're an outdated concept. They're something that we need to really move past and beyond, especially regarding the paladin. In fact, I think we should be removing the name paladin and just replacing it with the word crusader. Someone who is simply a knight of a deity who gains powers through their devoted service to that god's tenets. So, if you are like me and you like a little bit of homebrew, I highly recommend taking this perspective. If you have a character playing a paladin, outline a strict guidelines relevant to your deity and stick to that. As long as you don't break these, you're a paladin. Easy. Done. Nothing else. If, however, you do like to stick to the rules and obviously play very close to the chest, then, of course, when you play your oath-bound paladin, remember your code. Unlike the Pathfinder paladins who need to follow an alignment restriction, you don't have to. And while you might be honest, you may use your honesty to get people into trouble and stir up, problems wherever they might arise. There is actually nothing preventing you from being able to do that. There is nothing saying that you can't be willing to sacrifice an innocent life in order to try and do something that you deem the greater good. These acts of conflict are what we call the Paladin's Dilemma, and in Dungeons and Dragons, the Paladin's Dilemma shines heavier than in any other system that I've played in. So that's how you want to be looking at it. You want to be looking at it as how do you face these challenges and dilemmas? How do you overcome your own restrictions? Do you look for loopholes in your code, or are you someone who sticks to it, even the spirit of your particular oath? Meanwhile, on the other scale, we have the Pathfinder Paladins, and well, I'm going to be honest here. I think they're very restrictive, and they are heavily punished for breaking alignment. When you are dealing with any kind of alignment shift, I want to say this outright. No one act should shift a paladin from being lawful or good to a different alignment. No one act should. Unless it's something world-changing. Unless it's something that has a massive impact on the world. And it can't be something like a butterfly effect thing, like, oh, you forgot to secure this room, and this vampire managed to go out and set free a 10,000-year-old vampire who took over an entire nation. Don't you feel terrible? Well, yes, I know you don't know you've done that, but you've suddenly fallen from grace for reasons unknown to you. Now, don't do that to paladins. Instead, you want to make sure that your paladin player is clear that while they can do things that don't necessarily follow their code, it has to be to the spirit of their code or to the spirit of what they're doing. For example, the idea of not lying is a big one. Not lying does not mean you have to blurt out the truth every chance you get. It does not mean you have to tolerate a dishonest person in the group, but it doesn't mean that you cannot see the merit and the good that can come about from this person's deception. So while you are not deceiving them, you have no oath or no obligation to stop all deceivers and bring them to justice. Nor do you have an obligation to stop any and every single evil that occurs in your line of sight from happening. Don't bother with that. Pick and choose your fights. Even paladins understand that they have limitations. They have exhaustion. They have finite resources. And picking a fight everywhere you go is just not the way to go about it. So, that is how Pathfinder Paladins, I recommend you deal with them. All right. Now let's talk a little bit about how I handle them as players. Now, if I'm a player and I've chosen to play a anti-paladin or a paladin, I don't look at my code or my morality versus the GM and the world he's presenting. Instead, I look at an internal conflict. Faith versus conviction. Now, this is a very interesting concept because faith and conviction are so tied hand in hand. With the paladin, a lot of people lump them together, saying that, well, of course, you worship a deity and you work for the church and you go off and you do this, and of course, they're the same thing. Well, what happens if your church asks a paladin to perform an action that he thinks may not be in the best interest of his deity? In fact, it seems as though his church is almost sacrificing this paladin for a greater good, as it were. Do you stand by your convictions and follow through with your church's desire, or do you follow what you know in your heart to be true to the deity you worship? This is the conflict between faith and conviction. I love doing this with my paladins because for me, that is where the real development comes in. That's where the real focus happens to be. You can't sit there and expect your paladin to simply go around flopping around their righteousness or immorality, as it were, and just saying, well, the world itself looks absolutely terrible and doesn't match my beliefs, so I'm just going to go around and just make sure that everyone understands that I'm right and they're wrong. You other people in my group, do you believe what I believe? No? I smack you. You don't want to play like that, because that creates the paladins that everyone argues about and everyone hates, right? Instead, temper that between a conflict within yourself. Where does the line get drawn between your loyalty to your church and your duty and your loyalty and faith to your God? All right, so the next thing we want to be talking about is paladins and how we deal with them as a GM. Now, the easiest way to talk about these guys is don't treat them any different to any other player. They are a character, treat them like every other character. I feel like one thing a lot of GMs tend to grab onto as soon as a paladin hits their table is the fall of the paladin or the redemption of the paladin. While it's a great narrative and an awesome story to put into your game, it's really cool if it happens organically. Don't try to force your players to fall, or don't try and tweak it. As soon as you as a GM set the motivation of having your paladin lose all their powers and abilities, then your player can kind of start reading into it, and your player will start holding it literally your responsibility for the fact that they've lost all their abilities and functionality in the game. Instead, what I recommend is look at two aspects that precursor the fall or redemption of a paladin character, and that is, of course, temptation. Now, temptation is such a powerful word, and I love it because it just rolls off the tongue. Temptation. Yes, that's right. It doesn't have to be temptation in the sense of good being tempted to evil. Evil can very well be tempted into a righteous path as well, and equally could stand to lose their powers and abilities. one of my most favorite concepts actually came from a card game. One of my favorite card games, in fact, Red Dragon Inn. As recently as I think a couple of months ago, they released a character in the decks called Morgath, and I love him. He's a fantastic anti-paladin character who carries with him a blessed sword. And the blessed sword tends to interfere with his evil acts, despite how much he wants to do them. Now, I love that concept. I love the idea that this anti-paladin is being almost forced along a path to redemption. In that same way, you can see paladins being turned to evil, anti-paladins can be turned to good as well. The temptation idea is like the apple on the tree. You want to put something out there that your player then has the option to reach out and grab. You must make it seem like something interesting, something that they really, really want to do. Allow me to give you a insight into a story that I shared on Facebook quite some time ago, actually now. But this story goes back a fair way. A group of adventurers find themselves trapped beneath the streets of a well-known town, deep within what appears to be an ancient, ruined society that belonged to a long-forgotten empire. A paladin, traveling with his group of allies, come across a bound creature, an evil demon known as a Glabrazu. Now, Glabrazus are very interesting types of demons because they like granting wishes, but enjoy twisting these wishes for their own nefarious purposes. Now, this particular Glabrazu was bound here by a summoner and cannot leave, and has no power or ability to use its wishes or abilities in order to set itself free. However, granting wishes to others circumvents the contract that it had basically been forced to when bound. So as the PCs approached, the Glabrazu turned to them and said,
"Now listen, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, look, a great and scary beast. But I have no desire to remain here on this plane no more than you would see me remain here in your path. So I present with you this instead. Rather than having a tedious fight, in which surely I will suffer injuries, but more than your fair share will die, I will grant you but a single wish. You can use this wish to simply tell me to heck off, as it were."
To which the paladin and the rest of the group basically went, "Never, fiend! You will perish at the end of my holy blade! Ha!" Battle ensues, swords slashes, spells fly, Glabrazu roars, clawing and biting and chomping at the party until one character is felled by a mighty blow. A critical hit tears through this character and they land slumping to the ground, dead with blood trickling from their form. At this point, the paladin ceases battle. He asks the others to stay their wrath and stay their hand. He turns to the Glabrazu and asks, nay, pleads, to allow him that wish. The Glabrazu turns and says, "Why should I do such a thing?" And he says, "Because I will break your binding circle and set you free, so long as you can return my friend." Now, this temptation, this apple that hung from that tree, is the palpable moment. The paladin is now actively on their own choosing to treat with an evil creature in order for selfish gain. This is the perfect chance for that paladin to fall, and it's one that they've made as a choice. It's something they've decided to do, and that for me is where you want to be when you play around with this kind of concept. No one really likes losing all their powers and abilities. In fact, the only way that you're really going to get away with that is if your player who is playing the paladin has an inordinate amount of trust in you as a GM. Trust that A, you will make sure that at some point or another they have the ability to gain their powers back. That B, even though they lose their powers, they will still be relevant to the group. They will still be able to manage battles and fight and stand true on their own. And last but not least, that their sacrifice of their paladin abilities is going to amount to something. You know, there's no point in you losing all of your paladin abilities just because your DM wanted to have a quick go at having you fall. And it's like, well, I accidentally killed a child because someone dominated me and now I have lost all my powers. Fantastic. A child is dead and I have no powers. You know, you haven't gained anything. You haven't grown. You haven't even challenged that player. You've just kind of forced them into a scenario. So try and avoid that if you can. The harder aspect is looking at the redemption quest. Now, with the redemption quest, I always recommend playing it like you are treating the paladin like an anti-paladin. That way you can use the plot for both things. You know, if you're using it on an anti-paladin or if you're using it on a paladin that has fallen, you know, it kind of goes in a circle. So, with an anti-paladin, redemption is quite simple. You need to find a way for their motivations to push them towards something good. It could be along the lines of, another example, another story. Story time. I like story times. Like I said, we're covering 2 classes technically today, so I can give you 2 stories. Once upon a time, there was this anti-paladin, this evil character who was named Shroud, a rather tall and imposing figure. He worshipped the god of death, and all he wanted to do was simply end life and spread sickness and decay, as it was one of the most efficient ways of death to spread. So, the first thing he did in town was he went to the local slums, brought about 1,000 gold worth of food, and started handing it out to the poor. He shook their hands firmly, you know, thanking them for, being alive and helping them feel grateful and coming to terms with a hard and terrible life that they lead. And as he did so, the reason being is every person's hands he shook, he hoped that there was a disease that he would then spread into his hand, him of course being immune to this effect, and then spread it to the next person. Little did he know that, despite his best efforts, no one in the slums was sick. So he spent the whole day feeding the poor, and that is all. So even though he didn't have the motivation to do it, it turned out that he fed the poor. Now, at some point later on in the game, they were scouting for this assassin who had been hiding in the city. And who shows up but a group of the homeless who tell the anti-paladin exactly what he needs to know. He then takes it upon himself and says, strange, I was going to go around and start torturing people and shaking them down to get this information, but these people who I fed earlier on in the day have just given me the information of their own free will. I mean, maybe there's something to be said about being a good guy. This set him on the path to being going from an anti-paladin to a paladin. Sadly, he did die before he got to that stage, but, that's kind of what you look at. You look at that point of rewarding them for their good actions and encouraging them to keep taking them. Alright, so that covers our faith versus conviction and the whole rise and fall of a paladin. Now, we are going to be finishing off by talking about how to play righteous or immoral characters. Now, I did a video on playing good characters and playing evil characters, and pretty much the advice here is exactly the same thing. Number 1, don't swing for the fences. Do not look at every scenario you come at and go, I'm going to figure out the most evil thing to do, or I'm going to figure out the most good thing to do. Do not be unflinching and unmoving in what it is that makes you your paladin, right? As soon as you start doing that, you are no longer playing a character, you are simply being a carbon copy of an NPC, right? You have feelings, your character has feelings, they have morals, they have values, they have experiences that uniquely shape who they are. There are many levels of being good. Another great example, again, I know lots of paladins, so bear with me. I had a paladin in one of my games who was attending a crusade against an evil army of demons. Now, he was a miserable sot. He hated everyone. He hated people, didn't want to talk to everyone. He was a grizzled old veteran. Even his partner kind of didn't really stand him. They were walking down the street and the partner saw a homeless person, gave him a gold coin and said, praise be to Hodar and... I hope that you find your path. And the nasty, surly, angry paladin took the gold coin back off him, gave it to his friend, and basically said, get your ass up and get a job, you bum, and walked off. Now, both paladins are good. One paladin has the intention of trying to support the other through generosity and charity. The other is trying to support them through tough love, trying to encourage them to do better with their life so that they can stand true on their own. Both are good characters, but to different scales. And just like that, you can play your paladin to an entirely different scale of good and evil. Just remember this as you play and create your character. Lastly, of course, if you are going to play someone who is preachy or righteous or an evangelist or evil and stuff like that, don't aim your alignment restrictions, don't aim your morality at your party, right? Don't try to convert your party members to your faith. Don't try and force your party members to believe and act in the way that you believe. Nothing is worse than playing a rogue with a paladin and then having the paladin have to give you a lecture every time you crack open a door that is locked, or every time the paladin, sort of sees you pickpocketing. If you're a paladin and you're traveling with a rogue, you don't need to make perception checks. You don't need to try and catch this dude out. Your character could simply be in the mindset where he is, I suspect that at some point during the day, this character is going to rob someone. I'm not going to waste my breath, my time, my energy constantly looking for him and try to catch him out doing it. Instead, I am going to set a good example by myself so that hopefully they will become either an honest citizen or at least be more discerning with who they steal from. Stealing from evil, I could turn a blind eye to that, maybe. So yeah, that's what you want to do. Make sure that you turn that righteousness and that kind of holier-than-thou attitude outward rather than inward. Same thing with evil. Again, do not be evil to your group. I had a guy in another game who decided that, yes, my paladin is going to sacrifice our cleric, who is a healer and a worshipper of a good god, because, well, my church is enemies of his church, so I'm going to sacrifice him while he sleeps. And I said, well, okay, I don't really have much issue with this, apart from obviously the fact that you are now engaged in hostile actions, but I will take control of your character because you are now technically an NPC villain? Anyway, aim your attention, aim your aggression, aim your evil outward. And if you do happen to have an anti-paladin traveling with a paladin, always make sure that you give leniency both ways. The anti-paladin must be aware of the paladin's vows and don't do evil in front of them. Likewise, the paladin should probably not seek out and try to catch the anti-paladin when they are going through the efforts of hiding and concealing their actions. That is the best way for you guys to come up with a player contract to work together. In other cases, it could simply be more organic, and you could simply say, well, try to do it, and then I will, get into a fight with you, and then we can see how both characters die, and then the last man standing can keep playing their character. That works too, but, I prefer anti-conflicts at my games. Alright guys, this has been a very long video, and thank you so much for joining. I hope you did enjoy it. If you did, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Do check us out on all of our social medias down in the description below. Go check us out on Patreon as well. We have a whole bunch of new cool rewards, and I've just recently posted a brand new monster for the Pathfinder role-playing game called the Doppelgran, which is inspired from a character from the Twitch stream that I now do for Strange Aeons on Thursday mornings, I want to say, my time, which is GMT +8. So go check that on Twitch as well. Until next time, guys, as always, from me to you, game hard or die trying. See you later.